to the Dream 100 Show, the epicenter of influence, collaboration, and exponential growth. You're about to discover the power of relationships. Dream 100 relationships. And you're one relationship away from a totally different business and life. This is your host, Michael Tasner.
Hey there, and welcome to this week's episode of the Dream 100 Show. Today's topic is about one that I haven't brought up, but it's one of those strategies that I can single-handedly say has added millions of dollars of revenue during the course of my career. And that topic, that strategy, that tactic is producing and publishing a book. Now, before you start saying, oh my gosh, either A, you've heard this before, or B, you just don't have the time for it, I want you to hear me out a bit, but I want to talk through a strategy that we've been using with our done-for-you Dream 100 clients that's working extremely, extremely well. It's opening new doors, but it's also then helping in the conversion process. So not only is it helping land more Dream 100 relationships, but as those relationships then kind of come to the table, it's helping speed those along. And on the back end, as you're adding, selling, enrolling new Dream 100 and or regular clients, prospects, customers, depending on your business, the book is just one of those things that it just separates you from the pack. So I wanted to tell a very, very short story about my history with book publishing and why this is a strategy that I wanted to bring to you today. So way back when I had my first marketing agency, and I don't want to date myself, but this was way too long ago. I have a 40th birthday coming up, and I started in the marketing game when I was 15 years old. So I'd say like when I was 20, so like 20 years ago. We were on the leading edge, and we still are on the leading edge, but way back then, we wanted to do things that nobody else is doing. So we were exploring text message marketing and mobile marketing and secondlife.com, which is virtual reality world, which is very similar to all the stuff that's kind of coming out with Facebook's version of their headsets and their Meta headsets. And now you've got the Vision headsets from Apple, all of that stuff like 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I decided to try and get a book published. And back then, it was a lot harder to get a book deal, but also to get your own book published just by self-publishing. And I thankfully found a person that was helping edit the book for me, introduced me to a couple of people, and I got a modest book deal. Not a large book deal by any means, but a book deal. I had to write like a 50-page document of here's what I'm going to do to market the book and all that fun stuff. But what ended up happening 6 to 12 months after that book came out was night and day from where my agency looked before to after. We started getting phone calls of people that read the book and were like, Michael, how do we work with you guys? I read it, even though your book gave us the step-by-step. We don't have the bandwidth. How do we hire you to execute? How do we hire you to deploy it? I had a guy, my favorite story is a gentleman that read my book on the plane and came off the plane, called me from the airport. He sold hurricane windows in Florida and was like, what is the investment? Send me a proposal. Let's go. So really, really interesting stuff started to happen. It also opened doors into speaking and consulting and landed me on some pretty well-known stages. And then also just opened doors to relationships that it never would have opened, because it's that whole separating you from the pack and giving you the authority. Now, I don't want you to rule out yourself or your business because you feel that there's not something that you could contribute. Even if you've got a really interesting story, it's typically the books are not about you, and this book was not about me. The book was about helping entrepreneurs with their digital marketing. And it literally was a play-by-play. And every book that I have done since then, like Recession Marketing, for example, the No Joke Guide to Marketing Your Child Care Center, and soon to be Parent Marketing, and I've got a couple other really fun books that I'm almost done with. They're all about the tactics and how to. So even if you're like, I got a fun story, it could be interesting in a book, but we do pest control. We're a funeral home. We do landscaping. We do solar panel installation. Like, I'm just rattling off random niches. There's obviously thousands and thousands. What are we going to do a book on? What I preach with the Dream 100 is to go after your joint venture relationships, your partnerships first that already have your target customer on them. Build rapport by giving. Give value. When the time is right, invite them to your podcast. Then follow up with them. Send them a gift. Continue to follow up, and you keep that momentum going. But the secret sauce is the podcast. Those interesting interviews that you're going to start to do. That content will be the book content. And so, well, Michael, how does that work? How does that make sense? As you're doing the podcast, and let's even just say that you're a landscaping business. I'll try and pick one that's what I could deem tougher. Like, it's easier for a marketing agency to have 100 ideas for a book, but let's talk through a landscaper. All that I'm looking to do is to make you, and assuming that you're serving a local area, but if you're not, this can go wider. But I want to make you the local celebrity, or I want to make you the celebrity within your niche. And I know the word celebrity has been overused, and there's a lot of marketing agencies that toss that word around. Authority is another word that gets tossed around and used. There's actually a company that I used to work with and work at called Advantage Media. And this is why I know a ton about the book publishing universe. And they actually have the trademark for authority marketing. So they're the experts in that topic, among other things. But what's interesting with landscaping is as you start to interview these people, and if I'm a landscaper, let's say I'm doing commercial and residential, and if I'm looking at, okay, great, who has my clients already in their database? It's a pretty wide database. It could be other home service companies, for example. So maybe you try and partner with a company that's already doing pest control, and maybe a company like Mosquito Joe. But what you can do is you start to bring those guests on, and when you are thinking about the type of content, it's all about helping that guest feel special, helping that guest feel like the celebrity for 30 minutes. But if you start to put in some interesting questions that could make for an interesting book, for example, maybe you ask a question about what's your favorite place to eat in the area and why. Maybe you ask what's their number one tip to maintaining a happy and healthy home. And they might say, okay, great, we'll have pest control, but okay, fine, that I get it, but what else? Or like, tell me more, like, how does that contribute? Well, did you not know that if XYZ happens, all of a sudden you have voles, they get into your basement, it's a $50,000, like, and here's that little amount of maintenance could really help you in the long run. So and that's not the most interesting of topics, but if you start to collect those stories, and then you get another one the next week, and the next week, and then you're able to take those and start to formulate a book. Now, does it make sense to have a book of landscaping secrets, for example? Yeah, you definitely could have a book that is 100% focused on your exact type of business. But what if you were the author and then all of these other people that came on were essentially co-authors, but you gave them a chapter in the book, and your book was titled something like the 25 best secrets to keeping an amazing home, as told by some of the local experts. Now, what this ends up doing is elevating those Dream 100 relationships that you have, because now you're putting them into a book, and we'll talk about how to get it published and all that fun stuff in just a minute. But you've now elevated those Dream 100 relationships where, hey, they're somewhat famous, especially if they don't have a book. Hey, you're in chapter 6, and let me mail you 50 copies as a small thank you. So you're elevating those relationships, but then you're able to start giving those out like candy. The whole thing with a book is it becomes your new business card. I have not produced new business cards in 5 years, maybe even longer, maybe even 10 years. I don't give out business cards. I typically will have a lot of copies of my book that I will hand out. I do carry that little, I think it's the dot card if they want to quickly add me to their cell phone, for example, like the QR code thing, but I don't produce new business cards. I would rather hand them my book. So now you're giving this book as a little bit of a fun thing for your sales team to give away on sales presentations. And just having that book separates you from all the other companies that do not have that. And this is a lot easier to get done than not. At Advantage Media, their whole process largely, and I'm oversimplifying, is something called Talk Your Book. So you speak content, they record it, they get it transcribed, and they turn that into a book. And I'm overly simplifying the process. So with the advent and the popularity of AI, there are so many interesting tools where we can take 5, 10, 15 hours worth of interviews over the course of X time, get them transcribed, and start to turn that into a book. And there are lots of easy ways to then get some book covers published and produced. And then we can hire different people, and we have them on our staff. But if you're trying to do this yourself, you can hire people that are editing experts and copy editing and ghostwriters and cover designers and all that. But it's not that overly complicated anymore. I mean, you literally could have your book selling it on Amazon within a week of having everything compiled. And the beautiful thing is when you self-publish, you're able to buy those books in the quantities that work for you. So if you want to go and buy 1,000 copies, you might be able to get the production cost to $1.50, $2 a book. If you warrant or have a business that might be a little bit higher end, like if you're a financial planner and they have other rules and restrictions for books with FINRA typically. But if you wanted something like that and you were appealing to a different audience, maybe you get the book hardcovered or you get some fun embossing or some interesting seals. So the sky really is the limit. But what I wanted you to start to think about as you continue and start on this journey with the Dream 100 is look at that podcast interview that you're doing as killing like 3 or 4 different birds with one stone. The first thing that it's doing is it's elevating the relationship. So you're going from you've kind of talked either on the phone, through email, or through social media, and now you've actually got on and you've got that video and audio. So now you've elevated the relationship to another level. The next thing that it does is it builds rapport very, very quickly. Third thing it does is it allows you to follow up. Like you now have a reason. Hey, we just published the podcast. Here's some clips for you. Hey, we just sent out our email to our database. We wanted to forward you the email so you can see that. Hopefully we drive you some new website traffic. So it gives you those reasons to follow up. But the icing on the cake, if you strategically execute these interviews, is that regardless of whatever niche you're in, it starts to produce really good content that then can get worked by a company like mine or different freelancers you hire and say, great, here you go. Here's 10 hours of podcasts that I did. And I think 1 chapter per person. And now you've got an interesting book. And then another reason to follow up with that Dream 100 relationship. And finally, you have an asset that's going to separate you from the pack. Your authority grows exponentially when you can show that you have a book. And if you continue to do this, well, now maybe you've got version 1 or edition 1. Now you've got edition 2 because you continue to do this. I like to mix in some of the fun. So like the restaurant thing or your favorite thing to do that nobody might know about or your favorite thing to do at XYZ time of the year. And you start to build in some other fun stuff. But what it's doing is it's continuing to keep your name out there in that market that you're trying to go after, whether it's a local market or a broad market. You're continuously out there because you're putting out these great podcasts. You're then pumping the content out all over the place from those interviews. You're getting the authority by association with your podcast guest. You're also getting the content. There's just a lot of really amazing things that start to happen. But I wanted to share this with you today because a lot of people have asked, Michael, I know you've written a bunch of books. What's the process? How do you do it? Every book that I've been doing and going forward for and even the last year or two, I start with video. I start with video like this or audio, but typically video. And I talk through it as if I'm having a conversation. And then I give that to my editors and say, here you go. Here's 10 hours. Here's the outline that I'm thinking, and here's the outline that I followed. Make it into a book. And typically a couple months later, I've got a book. And some of the most successful authors are doing this. Yes, you can use things like ChatGPT, and there are tools that can write an entire book for you. But I would much rather have it be authentic, real content that you then get all those other ancillary benefits. Sending out, hey, I'm going to send you 50 copies of the book. Like that, and then you're getting all of the people. Think about that. You send out 50 copies, 100 copies, whatever the number is, to your podcast guest who was a Dream 100 relationship. They now start to put some of those books in their lobby, for example. Maybe they give them to their team to hand out. Now you're getting introduced to their customers without you even asking. And it just starts to snowball. It is my favorite strategy. And I love writing, but it also, the other benefit that I haven't even talked about is that you're adding value. Like you're teaching, you're helping, you're guiding other people with really good content. Doesn't always have to be about growing your business, but you're also making that impact, which to me is a win-win-win all around. So take a look at how you're executing the podcast, make a couple of tweaks if needed on the questions so that you can get some really good content, and then move the needle on the book. You will be so glad you did. Thank you as always for tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. I'll see you next week.